If you look at a map of the Middle East, Jordan shouldn't exist. Not like this. It sits in the middle of one of the most volatile regions on Earth. To the north, Syria. To the east, Iraq. To the west, Israel and Palestine. To the south, Saudi Arabia. For over a century, nearly every border around it has caught fire at some point. Empires have risen here. Armies have marched through here. Civil wars have erupted around it like clockwork. And yet, Jordan is still standing. Not just surviving, standing. While neighboring states collapse into coups, revolutions, insurgencies, and foreign interventions, Jordan remained comparatively stable. No major civil war, no total state collapse, no regime implosion. Statistically speaking, that's almost suspicious. So here's the real question. Is Jordan stable because it's strong, or because it's something else entirely? Because when you zoom in, Jordan doesn't look like a powerhouse. It doesn't have vast oil reserves like Saudi Arabia. It doesn't control a strategic canal like Egypt. It doesn't dominate regional trade. In fact, geographically, it looks vulnerable. Small economy, limited water, surrounded by conflict zones, huge refugee populations, and a history filled with invasions, empires, and border reshuffles. By all traditional logic, Jordan should have fractured decades ago, but it didn't. And the first clue to understanding why lies not in politics, not in religion, not even in military power. It lies in geography. Because Jordan's physical location, the very thing that should have doomed it, might actually be the reason it survived. And once you see how that works, the stability of Jordan starts to look less like luck and more like design. Jordan's geography is strange, almost contradictory. It's the kind of place that looks like it should struggle endlessly, yet somehow manages to endure. At first glance, the country feels like a collection of disadvantages stacked on top of each other. But if you look closer, those same disadvantages quietly double as its greatest protection. Picture the landscape. In the west, rugged highlands rising to around 1,700 meters, dotted with ancient cities and fertile pockets of land. Move eastward, and the terrain transforms into a vast desert plateau averaging roughly 900 meters above sea level, wide, dry, and unforgiving. For a country roughly the size of Indiana, that's an impressive range of environments packed into a relatively small space. But there's one thing Jordan's geography severely lacks: water. And in the Middle East, water is often more valuable than oil. Jordan is one of the driest countries on Earth, receiving an average of just 245 millimeters of rainfall per year. Only about 20% of the land gets more than 200 millimeters annually. And even within that limited area, only around 7% is suitable for agriculture. Over time, expanding cities have eaten into that farmland even further. The result? Jordan cannot feed itself. Instead, it relies heavily on imported food, especially from allies like the United States, just to maintain basic stability. And if limited agriculture wasn't enough, there's another glaring absence: oil. In a region famous for energy wealth, Jordan is almost an anomaly. Surrounded by oil giants like Saudi Arabia and Iraq, the country has very little fossil fuel of its own. Its only significant natural gas field produces roughly 1 million cubic meters per day, enough to power a single major plant. Everything else must be imported, leaving the economy exposed to global price shifts and regional politics. On paper, this sounds like a recipe for instability. No abundant water, no major oil reserves, limited farmland, surrounded by conflict zones. So how does a country like this remain stable? Part of the answer lies in an unexpected strength: history. Jordan sits at the crossroads of ancient civilizations, home to iconic sites like Petra, a city carved into rose-colored rock that looks almost unreal, as well as Roman ruins, desert castles, and landscapes tied to religious traditions spanning thousands of years. This has turned the country into a unique tourism hub, a place where visitors can experience the Middle East's history without stepping directly into its conflicts. Tourism has quietly become one of Jordan's most important economic pillars, drawing millions of visitors from Europe, the United States, and increasingly Asia. But geography also protects Jordan in subtle ways. Look at its borders. To the east and south stretch the Syrian and Arabian deserts, vast, difficult terrain that historically limited large-scale invasions and still acts as a natural buffer. To the west lies the Dead Sea, sitting about 430 meters below sea level and nearly 9 times saltier than ocean water, an environmental barrier as much as a tourist attraction. The highlands form additional natural defenses, creating a layered landscape that slows movement and isolates certain regions. In other words, Jordan's geography doesn't just weaken it, it shields it. And that creates a fascinating paradox. The same lack of resources that prevents Jordan from becoming a regional superpower also makes it less threatening to its neighbors. Its harsh terrain discourages large-scale military campaigns. Its limited agricultural and energy resources reduce the incentive for conquest. So despite being surrounded by some of the most unstable borders in the modern world, Syria, Iraq, Israel, and Saudi Arabia, Jordan occupies a unique position, vulnerable on paper, but strangely insulated in reality. And when you add thousands of years of invasions, empires, and shifting borders into the equation, the survival of Jordan starts to feel less like a miracle and more like a carefully balanced outcome shaped by geography itself. Jordan today feels ancient. The ruins, the desert castles, the Roman columns, Petra carved into stone like it's been waiting there forever. But here's the strange part. Jordan as a modern country is actually very young. For most of history, this land wasn't Jordan. It was something else. Or more accurately, it was owned by someone else. If you fast forward through 3,000 years at high speed, it looks less like national continuity and more like a geopolitical relay race. Around 1000 BCE, the region was home to 3 independent kingdoms, Ammon, Moab, and Edom. Small but organized states thriving in a tough environment. Then came the Assyrians, then the Babylonians, then the Persians, then Alexander the Great, and the Greeks, then Rome. And Rome didn't just conquer it remodeled. Cities like Jerash were transformed into Roman urban showcases. Roads were built, culture shifted, local identities blended into imperial systems. Then Rome fractured. Islamic caliphates rose, control shifted again, trade routes changed, the region declined in importance compared to coastal and urban centers elsewhere. Then the Crusaders arrived from Europe, building massive fortresses that still stand today, like Kerak Castle, because apparently if you're going to invade the desert, you might as well build a castle while you're at it. Then the Crusaders left. The Mamluks, a powerful Egyptian sultanate, took control and successfully resisted the Mongols when most of the region couldn't. And finally, in the 16th century, the Ottomans absorbed the territory into their vast empire, where it remained for centuries. Notice a pattern? Jordan wasn't a power center. It was a corridor, an in-between space, important enough to control, not important enough to prioritize. Under Ottoman rule, the region was taxed but largely neglected. Infrastructure lagged. Local grievances grew. Revolts broke out in 1900, 1905, and 1910, small sparks of resistance against imperial indifference. They were crushed, but resentment simmered. Then World War I changed everything. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, Arab forces in the region sided with the British against the Turks. The collapse of the Ottomans created a vacuum, and in that vacuum, modern borders were drawn, often with more ink than local consent. After the war, the British took control. And in 1946, Jordan officially became independent as the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan under King Abdullah I. On paper, independence. In reality, instability. The young kingdom immediately found itself entangled in wars with Israel. It absorbed massive waves of Palestinian refugees, a demographic shift that reshaped the country permanently. Political tensions grew. In 1951, King Abdullah I was assassinated in Jerusalem by a Palestinian nationalist. The region around Jordan was exploding with coups, revolutions, ideological shifts, and Cold War alignments. Iraq saw monarchy collapse. Syria experienced repeated military coups. Egypt overthrew its king. Lebanon spiraled into civil war. By all regional patterns, Jordan should have followed the same trajectory. It had a young monarchy, a fragile economy, massive refugee inflows, ongoing military conflict, regional ideological pressure. Between 1946 and the late 1990s, the Middle East was arguably one of the most volatile political environments in modern history. And yet, something different happened in Jordan. Instead of collapsing into revolution, it consolidated. Instead of imploding, it stabilized. So here's the real mystery. How does a country that was conquered for 3,000 years, that emerged late, that lost wars, that absorbed refugees, that faced assassination and unrest, managed to become one of the most stable states in its region within just a few decades? Because at this point, geography alone isn't enough to explain it. Something else is at work. And that something has less to do with deserts or mountains and more to do with strategy. All right, now we build the real answer. Because Jordan's survival isn't magic. It's design. And that design rests on two pillars: internal control, external usefulness. Let's start inside the country. For nearly 80 years, Jordan has been ruled by the same royal family, the Hashemites. In a region where regimes flip like light switches, that alone is extraordinary. Syria collapsed into civil war. Iraq saw dictatorship, invasion, insurgency. Lebanon fractured repeatedly. Iran experienced revolution. Egypt overthrew its monarchy. Jordan, same dynasty, same throne. That kind of leadership continuity matters more than people think. Stability at the top reduces chaos below. You can't build long-term institutions if you're replacing the entire government every decade. But continuity alone isn't enough. Plenty of long-running regimes collapse violently. What makes Jordan different is adaptation. The monarchy learned early that survival in the Middle East isn't about brute force. It's about reading the room. When Arab nationalism surged in the 1950s, Jordan adjusted. When regional wars broke out, it avoided overcommitment. When protests rose during the Arab Spring in 2011, the king didn't send tanks into the streets like some neighbors did. Instead, he amended parts of the constitution, created an independent election commission, and publicly promised gradual reform. Was it perfect democracy? No. Was it smart survival politics? Absolutely. The royal family has also invested heavily in social legitimacy. Queen Rania has played a visible role in education reform, women's rights, and healthcare initiatives. These aren't cosmetic policies, they shape public perception. When 99% of the population has access to clean water in one of the driest countries on earth, that builds quiet loyalty. But the real masterstroke might be external positioning. Jordan doesn't try to dominate the region. It tries to be useful. That's a big difference. It has carefully aligned itself with powerful Western states, the United States, the UK, France, while maintaining working relationships with Gulf monarchies. That security umbrella acts as deterrence. No neighbor wants to trigger a regional reaction by destabilizing Jordan. At the same time, Jordan has done something extraordinary. It opened its doors. Today, it hosts roughly 3 million Palestinians, 1.4 million Syrians, and thousands of Iraqis, Armenians, and others. That's an enormous refugee burden for a country with limited resources. And yes, it creates economic strain, but it also creates diplomatic capital. Refugees become leverage. Neighboring states may disagree with Jordan politically, but destabilizing Jordan would mean destabilizing millions of their own people living there. That changes the calculation. Then came perhaps the boldest move of all: peace with Israel. For most Middle Eastern states, openly normalizing relations with Israel is politically explosive. In Jordan's case, it was strategic. The 1994 peace treaty secured Western economic backing, security cooperation, and international support. But why didn't it trigger total regional isolation? Because Jordan had already positioned itself as neutral ground, not anti-Arab, not anti-Western, not expansionist, not ideological, neutral. In a region where almost everyone has chosen a side, neutrality becomes valuable. And for decades, that formula worked. No large-scale war, growing tourism, foreign investment, regional diplomatic relevance. But here's where the story gets complicated. Neutrality only works if the region tolerates it. In recent years, tensions have risen. In March 2024, Jordanian security forces foiled a suspected Iran-backed weapons smuggling plot from Syria. Mines, explosives, rifles, allegedly intended for anti-monarchy groups inside Jordan. Other attempts have reportedly occurred as well. At the same time, Jordan shot down drones and rockets fired by Iran toward Israel, aligning more openly with Western and Israeli security interests. That's a risky move, because inside Jordan live millions of Palestinian refugees, many deeply invested in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If regional tensions escalate, internal pressure could grow. And that's the core vulnerability. The very thing that has protected Jordan, its neutrality, now sits in a delicate balancing act. Lean too far west, and domestic unrest grows. Lean too far toward regional populism, and Western security backing weakens. Jordan has survived because it stayed balanced. But balance requires constant adjustment. So here's the final paradox. Jordan is stable not because it is powerful. It is stable because it made itself necessary. Necessary as a buffer. Necessary as a refugee host. Necessary as a diplomatic bridge. Necessary as a quiet corridor in a loud region. For over half a century, that role has kept it afloat. The question now isn't how Jordan survived the past. It's whether it can keep balancing in a region that is once again shifting beneath its feet. And in the Middle East, balance is never permanent. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Jordan, check out the next video, and as always, thanks for watching.